The slap cracked across the ballroom like a gunshot, and in that single frozen second, 200 of the city's wealthiest guests watched Damian Cole strike the one woman none of them ever expected him to touch. The woman who, in exactly 11 minutes, would bring 3 of the most powerful men in the country crashing through those doors to destroy him. Isabel Marchetti didn't cry. She pressed her hand to her burning cheek, straightened her spine, and lifted her eyes to meet her husband's, and that silence, that refusal to break, was what made the smiling woman behind him finally stop smiling. Because everyone in that room believed they knew Isabel. The quiet wife. The humble one. The woman who never raised her voice, who let her husband own every headline for 5 straight years. What none of them knew was the secret she'd buried since the day she married him. A secret that was, at that very moment, tearing down Lakeshore Drive at 90 miles an hour in 3 blacked-out SUVs. 3 brothers. 3 men who had made her one promise: stay out of her marriage completely, unless someone made her cry. Isabel hadn't cried tonight. She'd done something far more dangerous. She'd sent one text message 40 minutes earlier, 6 words long, and now there was no undoing what was already in motion. 2 hours before that message was sent, the night had been supposed to mean something entirely different. Isabel had spent the afternoon arranging white orchids across 40 tables, memorizing a seating chart, making sure the anniversary gala, 5 years since a small chapel wedding neither of them could technically afford, would still feel like theirs despite the 400 guests Damian's firm had insisted on inviting. She wore the necklace he'd given her the night he proposed. She'd rehearsed, quietly in the mirror, how she would finally tell him about the child she'd learned she was carrying only 3 weeks earlier, a truth she wanted to give him gently, not as ammunition. But Damian had been distant for months. Late nights stretching into later mornings. Meetings that required no meetings. A stranger's perfume on his collar that Isabel noticed the way she noticed everything, quietly and completely. When Damian arrived at the private reception room before the gala doors opened, he wasn't alone. Vanessa Reyes walked a step behind him in a red dress that clung like a decision already made, her expression carrying the particular calm of someone who believes she's already won. "Who is she?" Isabel asked, quiet and even. "Vanessa," Damian said, not quite looking at her. "She's joining the firm. Overseeing the merger." Vanessa's smile widened. "Some partnerships don't respect business hours." That single sentence told Isabel everything 4 months of silence had been building toward. "Are you seeing her?" she asked. "I'm tired of being interrogated in my own home." "I'm asking you a simple question, Damian. The truth is I can't keep living like this." Isabel stepped back as though the words carried physical weight. "Then tell me what I did wrong." Vanessa's voice slid in, sugar over steel. "Maybe you should give him room to breathe." Isabel turned on her. "You don't get to tell me how to speak to my husband." Vanessa laughed under her breath. "Your husband?" She glanced at Damian, almost pitying. "I don't think she understands yet." "Understands what?" Isabel's voice cracked, barely, but enough. Vanessa stepped closer to Damian and rested a hand on his arm like she'd done it 100 times. "That he's already made his choice." "Damian." Isabel waited for him to pull away from that hand. He didn't move. "I want a divorce," he said. The words hit harder than anything that would come after. Isabel said nothing. She only lowered her eyes, and it was that silence that gave Vanessa the confidence to say the sentence that changed everything. "You should be grateful he even gave you 5 good years." Isabel's head rose slowly. "What did you just say?" "I said a woman like you should feel lucky she got a man like Damian at all." "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." "Enough, both of you stop." Damian's patience snapped, but Isabel wasn't finished. "How long, Damian? How long have you been with her?" Silence. "Almost a year," Vanessa answered for him, almost proud of it. "A year. A year of shared mornings, shared meals, shared silence Isabel had mistaken for exhaustion instead of betrayal. And it was that number, a year, that finally broke something loose in her, made her voice rise for the first time all night, made the whole room turn to look. Which is exactly when Damian's hand came up. The slap silenced the ballroom completely. Somewhere near the entrance, a man in a black suit lowered his phone from his ear, his face gone still as stone, having just heard 4 words from his brother that made his blood run cold. It just happened. Move. Because 6 minutes before that hand ever touched her face, Isabel had typed a text message to the only 3 people on earth she trusted without condition, a message she'd prayed for 5 years she would never have to send. Now the ballroom doors were being pushed open from the outside, hard enough to swing wide and slam against the walls, and every head in that gilded room turned at once toward the 3 men now standing in the entrance, perfectly still, perfectly silent, looking directly at the mark still blooming red across Isabel's cheek, because Damien Cole was about to learn, in front of everyone he'd ever tried to impress, exactly whose wife he had just struck. The 3 men didn't run. They didn't need to. Their footsteps against the marble floor carried a rhythm so controlled, so unhurried, that the entire ballroom seemed to shrink around them as they crossed it. The string quartet had stopped playing minutes ago, but the silence that replaced the music was somehow louder than anything they'd performed all night. The tallest of the 3 reached Isabel first. His name was Adrian Voss, the eldest, a man who had built a shipping and logistics empire from a single leased warehouse before he turned 30 and now sat on boards that most people only read about in financial columns. He didn't say a word to Damien. He didn't even look at him. He knelt in front of his sister, his hand hovering near her cheek without touching it, as though touching it might make the injury more real than it already was. Isabel. His voice was low, controlled, terrifying in its calm. Look at me. She did. Her eyes were dry, but her hand was trembling against her stomach. I'm fine, Adrian. You are not fine. He turned his head, finally, toward Damien. Someone is going to explain to me what happened here. Behind him stood his 2 younger brothers. Malik Voss, the middle brother, was already scanning the room the way he scanned every room, cataloging exits, faces, threats. He'd spent 6 years as a federal prosecutor before leaving to run his own private investigations firm, the kind wealthy families hired when they needed answers the police couldn't legally obtain. His eyes moved from Isabel's cheek to Damien's still raised hand to the woman in red standing just behind him, and something in his expression went very quiet and very dangerous. The youngest, Theo Voss, was the one who broke first. 28 years old, the CEO of a tech company that had gone public 18 months earlier and made him a name in 3 different countries, Theo had always been the brother with the shortest fuse. He stepped past Adrian before anyone could stop him and grabbed the front of Damien's jacket with both hands. You hit my sister. His voice cracked with something that wasn't quite a shout but wasn't far from one either. In front of 400 people, you hit my sister. Theo. Adrian's voice cut through without rising in volume at all. Not here. Theo let go, but the fury didn't leave his face. Damien straightened his jacket, his composure cracking at the edges now that the adrenaline of anger had curdled into something closer to fear. This isn't what it looks like, he said. It looks exactly like what it is, Malik said flatly. He hadn't moved from where he stood, but his voice carried across the ballroom easily. You struck your pregnant wife in front of 400 witnesses at your own anniversary party. The word pregnant rippled through the crowd like a current. Whispers erupted. Somewhere near the bar, a woman gasped audibly. Damien's face went pale, his eyes snapping to Isabel. Pregnant, he repeated, as though testing whether the word could possibly be true. Isabel said nothing. She hadn't planned on it coming out this way, not here, not like this, not as a weapon in her brother's mouth used to shame the man who was supposed to have been the first to know. Vanessa recovered faster than Damien did. She stepped forward, chin lifted, refusing to be diminished in front of a room she still believed she could win over. This is a private matter, she said. I don't see why her family needs to make a scene. Malik turned to look at her for the first time, and something about the stillness of his gaze made her take an involuntary step backward. You must be Vanessa Reyes, he said. It wasn't a question. Head of acquisitions at Cole Holdings for the last 11 months. Formerly of Ashford Capital, where you left rather suddenly after an internal audit flagged some irregularities in a client account. I read the file on the drive over. Vanessa's confidence flickered for the first time all evening. I don't know what you're talking about. You will, Malik said. Soon. Adrian rose slowly to his feet, keeping one hand steady on Isabel's shoulder, and turned to face Damien directly for the first time. 5 years ago, Adrian said, I told you something at your wedding. Do you remember what it was? Damien swallowed. You said if I ever hurt her. I said if you ever made her cry, the three of us would come. I didn't specify what would happen after that, because I didn't think I'd ever need to. Adrian's voice remained perfectly level, which somehow made it more unsettling than shouting would have. But you didn't just make her cry tonight, Damien. You struck her. In public. While she was carrying your child. And you did it standing next to the woman you've apparently been sleeping with for the better part of a year, based on what I overheard walking through that door. The crowd had gone completely silent now, phones quietly rising throughout the room, though no one dared to be obvious about it. I can explain everything, Damien said, his voice smaller now than it had been all night. You'll get your chance, Adrian said. But not here and not to me. Theo stepped forward again, calmer now but no less furious. There's a car outside. You're going to get in it, and you're going to sit there quietly while we figure out exactly how deep this goes. You don't have the right to. We have every right, Malik interrupted, because in the last 4 minutes, I've already found 3 financial discrepancies in your firm's merger paperwork that I'm fairly confident the board doesn't know about yet. So unless you'd like me to read them out loud right here, in front of your business partners, your investors, and the 2 journalists I recognize by the bar, I'd suggest you come quietly. Damien's face drained of every remaining trace of color. Isabel, still seated, still holding her stomach protectively, finally spoke, her voice quiet but carrying through the frozen room like a blade. There's something else you all need to know, she said, looking not at Damien, but directly at Vanessa. Something none of you have figured out yet. Not even my brothers. Adrian turned to her sharply. Isabel, what are you talking about? Isabel's eyes stayed fixed on Vanessa, whose composure had finally, completely shattered. She's not just after Damien's company, Isabel said. She's after something that isn't his to give her. Something that belongs to our family. And she's had help getting closer to it than any of you realize. The ballroom held its breath. Vanessa's mouth opened to protest, and then closed again, because for the first time all night, she looked genuinely afraid. The words hung in the air long enough that even the waitstaff had stopped pretending to work. Adrian's grip on Isabel's shoulder tightened. What do you mean, something that belongs to our family? Isabel drew a slow breath, steadying herself before she spoke again. 3 months ago, someone tried to access the Voss family trust records. Someone with credentials that shouldn't have existed. Malik went very still. That trust hasn't been touched since Mom set the access protocols. I would have been notified. You were supposed to be, Isabel said. But the request came through a shell entity registered to a consulting firm in Delaware. I only found it because I still have read access to the compliance logs from when I helped Mom set it up before she died. Theo frowned. Why would you have access to that and not tell us? Because I wasn't sure what I was looking at yet. And because, her eyes flicked briefly, painfully to Damien, I didn't want to believe it was connected to my own marriage. Vanessa's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. Malik caught it immediately, the small, betraying flinch of someone whose carefully built story had just cracked at the foundation. The consulting firm, Malik said slowly, watching Vanessa's face the entire time. Sterling Bridge Advisory. Incorporated 14 months ago. 0 public clients. 1 listed director. He paused. Your name isn't on it, Ms. Reyes. But your former assistant's is. Vanessa's composure finally cracked audibly. That has nothing to do with me. Then you won't mind if we ask her, Malik said. She's 20 minutes away. I already sent a car. Damien looked between Vanessa and the brothers, something dawning behind his eyes that looked less like anger now and more like dread. Vanessa, what is he talking about? He's fabricating things to protect his sister, Vanessa snapped, but her voice had lost its silk. I don't fabricate, Malik said quietly. I confirm. Adrian turned back to Isabel, softer now, though his eyes hadn't lost their edge. Why didn't you come to us the moment you found this? Because I wasn't sure Damien wasn't part of it, Isabel admitted, and the honesty of it seemed to land harder on Damien than the accusation itself. I needed to know if my own husband was helping someone try to steal from my family before I brought the three of you into my home and destroyed what was left of it. Damien's voice came out hoarse. Isabel, I would never. You didn't know about the baby until 10 minutes ago, she said, cutting him off, not cruelly, just factually. You didn't know I was still walking around with a photograph of us from our wedding day in my wallet until this exact moment, because you never once asked. I don't know what you would or wouldn't do anymore, Damien. That's the truth. The silence that followed was heavier than the one after the slap. It was Theo who finally moved things forward, his tech executive instincts kicking in past the fury. If someone's been trying to access Mom's trust for over a year, and Vanessa's assistant is tied to the shell company, then whoever's actually running this isn't in this room. Vanessa's a piece. Not the whole board. Malik nodded slowly. That matches what I found in the merger documents. There's a secondary signatory on 3 of the largest transfers out of Cole Holdings in the last 8 months. Someone with veto authority over Damien's own decisions. Damien's face went white. That's not possible. I'm the sole signatory on every account in this company. You were, Malik said, turning his laptop slightly so the small group could see the screen without broadcasting it to the rest of the ballroom. Until 6 months ago, when a secondary authorization was added under an entity called Northgate Family Holdings. Isabel's breath caught audibly. Adrian noticed instantly. You recognize that name. That's my father's company, Isabel whispered. The one he ran before he died. The one Mom always said was sold off after the estate settled. Her hand rose slowly to her mouth. It was never sold. Someone's been operating it this entire time. Who has access to it? Adrian asked, his voice suddenly urgent in a way it hadn't been all night. Isabel's eyes lifted, and for the first time since the slap landed, real fear crossed her face, not for herself, but for something larger, something none of them had seen coming. Only one person besides me and my mother ever had legal authority over Northgate, she said. Because Mom trusted him more than she trusted almost anyone. She trusted him enough to make him executor of half the estate before she got sick. Who? Theo demanded. Isabel's gaze moved past her brothers, past Damien, past Vanessa, and landed on a man standing quietly near the ballroom side entrance. A man in an impeccable gray suit who had been watching the entire confrontation unfold from a careful distance, sipping champagne as though he were simply another guest enjoying the evening's unexpected drama. Uncle Marcus, she said. The man's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't so much as set down his glass. He simply raised it slightly, almost like a toast, and offered the smallest, coldest smile any of them had seen all night. Took you all long enough, he said. And then, calmly, without a single trace of urgency, he turned and walked toward the ballroom's side exit, leaving 400 stunned guests, 3 furious brothers, a husband who no longer understood his own company, a mistress whose usefulness had clearly run out, and a pregnant woman who suddenly realized the man she trusted with her mother's dying wishes had been the architect of her entire nightmare from the very beginning. For a moment, no one moved. The revelation hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, and it was Theo who broke first, sprinting toward the side exit before anyone could stop him. He's not leaving this building. Malik was faster than he looked, catching Theo's arm before he reached the door. Let him go. Let him. Malik, he just admitted to running a shell operation against our own family and you want to let him walk out? I want him to think he's walking out clean, Malik said, already dialing something into his phone. I flagged his car the second Isabel said his name. 2 of my people are outside. He's not getting past the valet stand. Adrian, still steady, still controlled despite the chaos rippling through the ballroom around them, turned to Isabel. How long has he had access to Northgate? Since Dad died. 14 years. Isabel's voice had gone thin, brittle, the fear finally breaking through the composure she'd held since the slap. Mom trusted him because he was Dad's best friend before any of us were born. He walked me down the aisle when Dad couldn't. And he's had unsupervised control of half the family estate for 14 years, Malik said grimly. Nobody audits family, Isabel. That's exactly why it works. Damien, still standing exactly where he'd been left, finally found his voice again, though it came out smaller than before. If Marcus has been running Northgate this whole time, and Northgate has veto power over my company's accounts, that means he's had access to Cole Holdings' finances for 6 months without my knowledge. Longer than that, Vanessa said quietly. Every head turned to her. She'd gone pale, her earlier bravado completely stripped away, replaced by something that looked almost like relief at finally being able to stop pretending. What do you mean longer than that? Damien demanded. Vanessa's hands were shaking now. He approached me 18 months ago. Before I ever met you. He said he was an old family friend of the Voss family, that he wanted to help me get placed inside a company that had ties to them. I didn't know why at the time. I just knew the offer was more money than I'd ever been paid in my life, and he made it sound like I'd be doing something clever, not something wrong. You infiltrated my company on his instructions? Damien's voice cracked with disbelief. I was supposed to get close to you. Get inside the finances. Report anything unusual back to him. Vanessa's voice wavered. The affair wasn't part of the plan. That part was real, or at least I thought it was, until I realized he was using that too, using me getting close to you to slowly move money through accounts you never checked because you trusted me to check them for you. Isabel closed her eyes briefly. He built you into a weapon and pointed you at my marriage. I didn't know about the baby, Vanessa said quickly, guilt cracking through for the first time. I swear to you, I didn't know you were pregnant. If I had, you still would have done it, Isabel said, not unkindly, just certain. Because by the time you found out, you were already too far in to stop. Vanessa didn't argue. She simply looked down at the floor, and for the first time all night, she looked less like a predator and more like exactly what she was, another piece on a board she hadn't realized she was playing on. Malik's phone buzzed. He answered, listened for 10 seconds, and his expression darkened considerably. They caught him at the valet stand. He's not resisting. Malik paused, frowning at whatever he was being told. He's asking for Isabel specifically. Says he'll only talk to her. Absolutely not, Adrian said immediately. She's not going anywhere near him. I'll go, Isabel said. Isabel. He raised me, Adrian. Her voice was steady now, steadier than it had been all night. After Dad died, he was at every birthday, every graduation, every hospital visit when Mom got sick. Whatever he's done, I deserve to hear it from him directly. Not secondhand. Not through a phone call from your investigator. The brothers exchanged a look, the wordless kind that only siblings who've protected each other their whole lives can share, and finally Adrian nodded once, reluctantly. We go together. All of us. No exceptions. They moved as a unit through the stunned crowd, past 400 guests who would spend the next several days telling the story at every dinner party in the city, out through the same side exit Marcus had walked through minutes earlier with his glass of champagne and his cold, knowing smile. Damien trailed a few steps behind, uncertain whether he still had any right to follow, and Vanessa remained rooted in place, apparently deciding that whatever was about to happen outside was not something she wanted any part of. Outside, under the porte-cochere lights, Marcus stood calmly between two of Malik's security contractors, his expression maddeningly composed, as though he'd been expecting this exact moment for years and had simply been waiting for it to finally arrive. Isabel, he said warmly, as though greeting her at a family dinner instead of standing detained outside the wreckage of her marriage. You look so much like your mother when you're angry. Don't, Isabel said, her voice shaking now for the first time all night. Don't talk about her. Not after what you've done. Marcus's smile didn't waver. Everything I've done, I did for this family. You'll understand that eventually. Understand stealing from us for 14 years? Stealing. Marcus laughed softly, shaking his head. Is it stealing if it was always supposed to be mine? The words landed like a second slap, and this time, it was Adrian who went rigid. What did you just say? Marcus's eyes moved slowly from Isabel to Adrian, and the smile finally, chillingly, reached his eyes. Your mother never told you why your father really died, did she? The porte-cochere fell into a silence so complete that the distant hum of the valet's idling cars felt deafening. Adrian's hand, still resting protectively near Isabel's shoulder, went rigid. "What are you talking about?" Adrian's voice had lost all of its earlier control. "Dad had a heart attack. Isabel was 12. We were all there." "You were all there for the funeral," Marcus said calmly. "You weren't there 6 weeks before it, when your father found out what I'd been doing with Northgate even back then. Small things at first. Nothing anyone would notice. He noticed." Isabel's stomach turned. "You're saying you had something to do with his death?" "I'm saying your father and I had a very difficult conversation," Marcus said, his tone infuriatingly even, as though describing a minor business dispute rather than what he seemed to be implying. "I'm saying that conversation happened on a Tuesday, and his heart gave out the following Monday, and no one ever ordered a toxicology screen because why would they? A stressed, overworked man in his 50s with a family history of heart disease. It wasn't even suspicious." "You son of a..." Theo lunged forward, and this time it took both security contractors and Malik to hold him back. "I'm not confessing to anything," Marcus said smoothly, holding up a hand. "I'm simply telling you what your mother suspected, and chose never to tell any of you, because she didn't have proof, and because she was terrified of what would happen to this family if the 4 of you went to war with the man who still controlled half your father's estate. She protected us from you," Isabel whispered, horror dawning slow and complete across her face. "That's why she never removed you from Northgate. She was scared." "She was smart," Marcus corrected. "She understood that some truths are more dangerous exposed than buried. I respected her for that, even after everything." Malik's voice cut through, low and lethal. "You're telling us this now because you think it doesn't matter anymore. Because you think you've already won." "I'm telling you this now," Marcus said, "because in 11 minutes, the final transfer authorization clears on the Northgate accounts, moving controlling interest permanently into an entity I fully own. After that, it's irreversible. No court in this state will unwind a transaction executed under valid legal authority I've held for 14 years. So really, I'm not confessing anything. I'm saying goodbye." Malik was already moving, phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp and fast, feeding instructions to someone on the other end about freezing accounts, contacting the bank's compliance division, anything to buy time. Adrian stepped directly in front of Marcus, close enough that the security contractors tensed. "You will not touch another cent of this family's money." "I already have," Marcus said simply. "For 14 years. Tonight is just the part where it becomes permanent." Isabel's mind raced, sorting through everything Marcus had just said, everything Malik had uncovered about the shell company, the merger accounts, Vanessa's confession, and then, suddenly, something clicked into place that made her breath catch. "The letter," she said suddenly. Every head turned toward her. "What letter?" Adrian asked. "Mom's letter. The one she made me promise never to open unless something happened to threaten Northgate directly." Isabel's hands were trembling now, but not from fear, from something closer to hope. "She gave it to me the week before she died. She said if I ever needed it, I'd know." "Where is it?" Malik asked urgently, phone still pressed to his ear. "In my safety deposit box. I can be there in 15 minutes if we leave right now." Marcus's composed expression flickered for the first time all night. A small crack, barely perceptible, but Isabel saw it, and so did Adrian. "She left something," Marcus said quietly, almost to himself. "Of course she did. She never trusted me completely. Not once in 30 years. "Smart woman," Theo muttered. "We're not going to make it in 11 minutes, Malik said, checking his watch, then glancing at the valet stand. "Not through downtown traffic on a Friday night." "We will if we don't drive," Damien said suddenly. Every eye turned to him, the husband who'd been standing silently on the periphery of this unraveling nightmare for the last several minutes, uncertain of his place in it, uncertain if he even had the right to speak. "My helicopter's on the roof," he said. "I use it for site visits. It can have you at the bank's helipad in 4 minutes." Adrian studied him for a long moment, weighing something invisible, some calculation about trust and betrayal and second chances that Isabel could see playing out behind his eyes. After tonight, Adrian said slowly, I don't trust you with anything. I know, Damien said. But you don't have to trust me. You just have to use the helicopter. He turned to Isabel, and for the first time all night, his voice carried something that sounded almost like the man she'd married 5 years ago. Let me do this one thing right. Isabel looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had struck her in front of 400 people less than an hour ago, at the father of the child she was carrying, at the person who had somehow, impossibly, been telling the truth about not knowing any of this was happening around him. Fine, she said finally. But you're not coming with us. Damien nodded, accepting it without argument, and pointed them toward the service elevator that led to the roof. As they ran, Malik still shouting instructions into his phone, Theo half carrying Isabel to keep her pace steady despite her pregnancy, Adrian glanced back one final time at Marcus, still standing calmly between the two security contractors, watching them go with an expression that could only be described as amused. You won't make it, Marcus called after them, almost gently. Even if you get the letter. Even if it says everything your mother wanted it to say. 10 minutes isn't enough time to stop what's already been set in motion. Isabel stopped at the elevator doors, turning back just long enough to look at the man who had helped raise her, who had lied to her for 14 years, who may have had a hand in her father's death, and who was now smiling like he'd already won. You forgot one thing, Marcus, she said. My mother didn't just leave me a letter. The elevator doors began to close. She left me the authority to stop you the moment you tried this. I've had it for 6 years. I just never had a reason to use it until tonight. The helicopter blades cut through the night air as Isabel climbed in, Adrian and Theo close behind her, Malik still shouting into his phone as he ducked beneath the rotors. Below them, the city unspooled in ribbons of light, and Isabel pressed her hand against the window, her heart pounding harder than the beat of the blades above her. What did you mean back there? Adrian shouted over the noise, buckling in beside her. What authority? Isabel exhaled slowly, steadying herself. 6 years ago, before Mom got too sick to speak clearly, she added me as a co-trustee on a secondary instrument tied to Northgate. Not the trust itself, something separate. A safeguard. She never told any of you because she said if Marcus ever suspected I had it, he'd find a way around it before it mattered. A safeguard that does what, exactly? Malik asked, finally lowering his phone. It gives me the power to freeze any transfer of controlling interest in Northgate for 72 hours, if I invoke it before the transaction finalizes. Mom built in one condition, I could only use it once, and only if I could prove the transfer was fraudulent. The letter, Theo said, understanding dawning. The letter is the proof, Isabel confirmed. She documented everything. Every suspicion about Dad. Every irregular withdrawal she noticed over the years but couldn't act on without evidence. She knew, even if she couldn't prove it back then. She just needed someone to finish what she started. The helicopter descended toward the bank's rooftop helipad 4 minutes later, exactly as Damien had promised. Isabel was moving before the skids fully touched down, Theo gripping her arm to steady her, the four of them sprinting through the emergency stairwell into the bank's after-hours security entrance, where Malik's contacts had already arranged access. The safety deposit box room felt impossibly quiet after the roar of the helicopter. Isabel's hands shook as she turned the key, sliding out the long metal box, lifting the lid to reveal a single sealed envelope with her mother's handwriting across the front. For Isabel, when it matters most. Inside was the letter, exactly as her mother had described, pages of careful, deliberate handwriting documenting suspicions, dates, discrepancies, and at the very back, a single notarized document granting Isabel full authority to invoke the freeze the moment fraud could be demonstrated. Malik was already on the phone with the bank's compliance officer, reading the authorization number aloud, his voice tight with urgency as the clock ticked toward the deadline Marcus had given them. Isabel could hear the officer on the other end, could hear the pause, the keys clicking, the verification running. Transfer status, the officer said finally. Confirmed halted. 72-hour freeze in effect, pending fraud investigation. The room went silent except for the sound of Isabel exhaling a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 14 years. We got it, Theo said, disbelief cracking his voice. We actually got it. Adrian pulled Isabel into his arms, careful of the baby, careful of everything, and for the first time since the slap had echoed through that ballroom, Isabel allowed herself to cry, not from fear this time, but from something that felt almost like relief finally being allowed to surface. The following weeks unfolded quickly. With the freeze in place and her mother's documentation in hand, Malik's investigation team and a forensic accounting firm unraveled 14 years of Marcus's careful theft in a matter of days. The evidence was overwhelming: falsified authorizations, a decade of skimmed transfers, and financial records tying him directly to the shell company that had funneled money out of both Northgate and, eventually, Cole Holdings. Marcus was arrested within the month, formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable estate. The question of what had truly happened to Isabel's father remained, for now, an open wound the family chose to pursue quietly, privately, and relentlessly. Vanessa cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for leniency, her testimony providing the final pieces prosecutors needed to build their case against Marcus. She left the city entirely 6 weeks later, and no one in the Voss family ever spoke of her again. Damien's company survived the scandal, barely, propped up by the very brothers who had every reason to let it collapse. But surviving the company wasn't the same as surviving the marriage. In the weeks that followed, Damien tried, in small and clumsy ways, to be present, showing up at doctor's appointments he was no longer entitled to attend, sending flowers Isabel never opened, waiting outside her building on nights he knew she wouldn't let him in. She never raised her voice at him. She simply, gently, and completely closed that door. I don't hate you, she told him, the last time they spoke as husband and wife, sitting across from each other in a lawyer's office 6 months after the gala. I understand now that you were being manipulated by people far more dangerous than either of us realized. But understanding isn't the same as forgiving what you did to me in that ballroom. And forgiving isn't the same as going back. Damien nodded slowly, finally, fully accepting what he'd known for months but hadn't allowed himself to say out loud. She deserves better than what I gave her, he said quietly, not quite to Isabel, but to himself. Isabel gave birth to a healthy daughter the following spring. Her brothers were in the waiting room, all 3 of them, exactly as they had promised her mother they would be years before any of this began. Adrian held his niece first, his composed, controlled exterior finally breaking as tears rolled freely down his face. Theo declared with complete sincerity that he would personally fund whatever college she chose to attend, sight unseen. Malik, ever practical, had already set up a trust in the baby's name before she was even a day old, one with airtight protections that no uncle, however trusted, would ever be able to touch. A year after the night the chandelier light had shattered across the marble floor of that ballroom, Isabel walked through the small garden behind her mother's old house, her daughter balanced on her hip, when she heard footsteps behind her on the gravel path. I'm not here to ask you to come back, Damien said, standing a respectful distance away, dressed simpler than she'd ever seen him, none of the polished armor of the man who used to run a boardroom like a battlefield. I just wanted to give you something. He held out a small box. Inside was a photograph from their wedding day, restored and carefully framed, the only surviving copy after everything else had been lost or discarded in the divorce proceedings. I kept this, he said, because it reminded me of the one day I actually deserved you. Isabel looked at the photograph for a long moment, then up at him. Thank you, she said softly and meant it. He glanced at the baby, a small, sad smile crossing his face. She's beautiful. She is, Isabel agreed. She looks like my mother. They stood there a moment longer, 2 people who had once promised each other forever and had instead given each other the hardest lesson either of them would ever learn. Then Damien nodded once, turned, and walked away without looking back, and Isabel understood, finally and completely, that some doors close not because love was never real, but because staying open would have cost her everything that mattered more. That evening, her 3 brothers gathered around the table in the garden, raising their glasses as the sun set behind them. To Isabel, Adrian said. To the family Mom always wanted us to protect, Theo added. And to never letting anyone make her feel like less than what she's always been worth, Malik finished. Isabel looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her arms, then at the three men who had never once broken their promise to her, not for 14 years, not for one single night. She had lost a marriage. But she had kept her family, her dignity, and her peace, and she understood now, with a clarity she hadn't possessed a year earlier, that some doors have to close completely before you can finally walk through the one that was always meant for you.